back to the Racial Draft Podcast, where we change the complexion of the comic book universe one draft pick at a time. I am your host, Michael Ford, joined by my sometimes regular, sometimes irregular co-host, Randy. How's it going,
I
Randy?
I'm often irregular, so I will cop to that. I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
So, if this is your first episode, I apologize, and I especially apologize for this week because you're 1 week early before we kick off the fifth season of the Racial Draft. And in honor of the fifth season, we're gonna kind of do a little bit of a reboot of sorts. We're going to retell the origin story. Is what often happens in comic books when new listeners, or sorry, new readers pick up a new volume. Randy, I'm sure you're familiar with that, where they find a fun way of retelling the origin, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed.
This is the part of the comic continuity when all the old heads chime in and like, not my racial draft. No, bring back.
Exactly. This is the Not My Racial Draft episode. Thank you, Randy. Because as you may know, we have kind of gone back to basics on the format. We are back to the snake draft. No longer salary cap format, no longer bidding.
Oh yeah.
We are back in the draft order, put your draft picks in style. But we still have made some tweaks. So even though we've gone to, again, Kevin Feige style, even though we've gone back to day one, we've still made enough tweaks for people who are hardcore racial draft heads to say, well, that's not the way I remember it. So like I said, for the benefit of the first timers, for the people who are discovering the racial draft for the first time, I just want to kind of talk you through how it works conceptually. The best way of thinking about it is well, not every, but as best as we can approximate, different racial and ethnic demographics are represented here in the racial draft. We have 10 demographic delegations, and I think we'll probably stick to 10, going forward. But the idea is that kind of reimagining or revisiting these characters that exist in the canon and try to imagine a world in which, instead of the vast majority of these characters being white characters, because that was the default back in the day, what if they weren't the default back in the day? What if these characters, which is all thrown into a pot, and people had to distribute the demographics, so it wasn't just uh, all white people, all men. I mean, we're not necessarily doing a gender draft, but we can still kind of think about the implications of these characters and how they used to be imagined, and what factors, if any, would change if this character was reimagined in a different form. The goal here, as always, is to reimagine the character in a way that benefits the character rather than diminishes the character. So, in that spirit, that's kind of what each group is trying to do when they racially draft a character. Randy, do you have anything that you think I'm sort of quickly glossing over and not going into depth?
Um, no, I think that covered it pretty well. I just would add that yeah, typically the at least for myself and a couple of other delegations was largely like um race bending the white characters, but there have been other delegations who also have been like, well, we can reimagine some characters who are not necessarily white, but just not my particular delegation. So say for example, we've gotten, black characters that have been reimagined by the Latino delegation, and not always would they be necessary. Like there's a lot of intersection there. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you might get a character who's black who also is Latino, but then not necessarily is that the case, or not
Right.
necessarily will they remain black if they become a Jewish character. It's just like they sort of had the option to play with those intersections and how those things might you know.
Yeah, and and that's a finer point that I suppose I can kind of get into. The main goal when you think about drafting a character for your delegation is that that character primarily is identified with that delegation. So while that character could, in some instances, have um, a mixed background, the key would be that that character is being kind of claimed um, for that group. So I mean, one example would be someone like Miles Morales, who is both Black and Puerto Rican. But were that character to be drafted by the Black delegation, that character would identify both in universe and to the audience as primarily viewed as Black. Not to say that the other characteristics wouldn't be there. I mean, that was ultimately left to the reimagining, but the key is Black first, if you will. Um, and one of the delegations that we do have is the multiracial delegation, which allows them to adopt all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of why we have a multiracial delegation. So I mean, I don't know if maybe this is a little bit before your time, Randy, but there was a famous quote from Tiger Woods where he said, "Oh, I'm not Black. I'm Cablinasian." Because he took all his ethnic backgrounds and he mashed them together into one identity. Uh, that would kind of be what the multiracial delegation would be doing in various permutations, if you will. So, but yeah, I mean, like I said, the idea is to keep the character as much as possible intact. I will be a hardliner in terms of um, criticizing when I believe that a character is being diminished by its by the reimagining. And of course, you as the listeners and you as the audience, follow us on social media at Racial Draft Pod on Twitter, Racial Draft on Facebook, and racial.draft on Instagram to give your feedback. And we will always, well, not always, we will often take into account fan feedback. If you're a racist, we will only take your feedback into account if you put your full government name out there for us. So if you do that, then we'll read it on the podcast. But if
I
not,
mean, and also just because I haven't exactly been a fan of kind of the replies toward my particular delegation, I will seldom take your feedback. Like I'm good. I don't really get a whole lot of, yeah. So, but everybody else will try to keep those things in mind.
yeah, and as always, it's not completely scientific, but we do have a polling approval system, and we do give points for the most popular picks. If you can get 90%, or in this season we've changed it a little bit. If you can get above 80%, you will get points for your draft pick. If people, by and large, don't approve, that could pose problems down the line. One thing that we also have for the benefit of protecting certain characters who people feel are essentially one identity, we do have a challenge process. If a character is drafted in such a form that it just can't work, that one delegation believes that the aggrieved delegation believes that that character has been broken by that draft, they have the opportunity to challenge and present their case for why that character should not be drafted in that way. And if the people agree, if they can get more than 50% majority rules in favor, then that pick gets blocked. So it's just another consideration in terms of the I would say the integrity of the racial draft. I'm a big believer in the integrity of the process. Beyond that, obviously, like I said before, there have been some tweaks to how we're going to score this so that we can keep the focus on the creativity and to the extent that certain delegations want to defend their characters, that's a perfectly valid strategy. And I don't want to penalize people who want to just keep their characters as is. That shout out to you, white delegation. Um, if you just want to preserve your white characters, I do not want to have the system penalize you for that. But again, Randy, you speak often for the black delegation, and I know that you often get it from both sides in that respect because there are so many beloved black characters that that people don't want to see fall by the wayside. That people don't want to see get lost to other delegations. So
Hmm.
like I said, I don't want to deter that kind of strategy, but I also do want
Oh,
to.
I'm not deterred. I
Um,
will be collecting the Caucasians rapaciously, persistently.
I mean, I hear you. I hear you. But what else? What am I missing, Randy?
I mean, I think that we covered it pretty well, just because the like is it the only, like, again, the only thing I would add to that, like the intersectionality of it all, kind of is what stands out for me, because we have these sort of like the racial conversations in and of themselves, but they often lend to also kind of like, well, what about sort of the immigrant experience, and what about like sort of how would this I mean, if for example somebody was adopted, how would that kind of factor into how they perceive things? And so I feel like it lends to a lot of broader conversations that um basically wouldn't have really been considerations back when these characters were first um designed or created, because they were just kind of like whiteness was the default, and
Right.
kind of whiteness as like the typical sort of nuclear family or what have you. And so they didn't really do a lot of deviating away from that, because the times just kind of didn't really let you promote somebody who was other than a typical white guy.
Right. And one of the things that have happened over the years is that even as diversity was being pursued, it was
Mhm.
still kind of primarily being pursued along the Caucasian lens.
Yeah.
So, you know, we make the common refrain about redheads being the people of color of the white community. There that being the allowable way to depict diversity in the
Yeah.
50s and 60s.
I mean, if you
People
get
of hair
marginalized.
color, if you will.
Right. And a lot of the stories that we get in terms of like marginalization, like the X-Men back in the day, like when they first came out, X-Men, and Doom Patrol, and up, recently, like Handmaiden's Tale, like you're you're sort of downplaying the presence of a thing, like you're posing it as a hypothetical,
Mhm.
when there are people out there for whom that is reality.
Right.
Just
And I
because
and
you
I would
kind of put
say,
white people in that space.
sure, and I would say that goes back to your point about intersectionality. Um,
That's the whole other conversation.
of intersectionality, because while it is perfectly fine to say that mutants are an allegory
Mhm.
for marginalized people, and it does in that universe create a marginalization, it doesn't mean that the other forms of marginalization don't exist.
Right.
And I think that modern storytelling is enriched by acknowledging that those intersectionalities exist.
Yeah.
That it's important. I mean, we talked about this before, but we can get into it again. A character like Storm, I think it's more believable that a character like Storm, even though she's a mutant, would still be embraced by the black community, by the non-mutant black community.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, and that's, I think that's sometimes lost in Storm stories, that she, you know, has the ability to to live in those two worlds, to an extent that maybe some of the white characters don't.
yeah. And I think like I mean, I don't know. We just there's a lot more to explore in reference specifically to Storm because we get sort of the powerfulness of her and the poise and the beauty and the strength. And I understand like it's great as a Storm fan. Like that's
Mhm.
it's great. I love seeing a black woman character being portrayed in such a positive light, but there you have you kind of if you are a black person it is much easier to realize that like her situation wouldn't be all sunshine and roses and
Mhm.
so to see more depth in terms of sort of the struggles of it all and what might not be quite so flattering to see in terms of how people perceive her. um I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more that deserves to be told in terms of her stories because I love the power of her, but the vulnerability of it also resonates and it means something as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've talked about it kind of, we've you know, maybe not so far in depth, but you know, we do have a little bit of time to get into it today. I think one of the issues with Storm is that for so long she was the black female comic book character.
Hmm.
And she meant all things. She had to mean all things for you know, for black girls and black women that wanted to see themselves in comics. And I think that because of how important she was, that creators, particularly white creators, let's face it, the majority of her stories written by white people, were very
Yeah.
afraid, very afraid to step in it, you know, very afraid to present her in a light that would, you know, create negativity, create a negative response. You know, you can't do that to the only black woman that's out here. You know,
And
like,
and frankly, I'm grateful for the caution because I don't feel like obviously they're nervous about it, but rightfully so. You're not in a position to define that.
and
So
look, we've seen what they've done to other black characters.
yeah, yeah,
So, you know, given the alternative, you know,
yeah,
there's not
exactly.
a Snap Wilson storyline with
Right,
Storm. You know, even the
exactly.
Mohawk, even if you go back to like Mohawk Storm, like there's a world in which you know, they wouldn't have been as sensitive in kind of making her like streetwise,
Mm-hmm.
and it could
Yeah,
have turned into this, you know, horrific stereotypical um you know, caricature of a black street street attitude.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, they played it, I mean, fairly safe. And I'm grateful that we kind of have, room for that to be explored. I don't know. It's just like this current era, I feel like is um giving us a lot more meat on the bone in terms of her person. Like, I'm not somebody who has read a whole lot of X-Men in terms of the past issues and all of that. So obviously there's stuff that I'm missing. But I feel like this current era is giving um a lot of strength that's not just from sort of posturing and showboating type, that sort of like bravado of it all,
Mm-hmm.
but just you see she feels deeper. I guess I'll just say like it's not just sort of I command the winds and by the whatever the elements obey me. Like no, it's the
Right.
cartoon is great, but we get to see more of like oh she maneuvers politically and diplomatically. She's and she's a great leader and all this other And you still get to see sort of the playful side of her, has her little banter with Nightcrawler or Jean or whoever, and we get to see that the depth is just very clear in this era. I'm really enjoying her storytelling this time around.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely think that she's more three-dimensional, but I still
Mhm.
do think, and again, I'm not advocating per se, I'm not advocating for a change per se, but I do acknowledge that if we kind of go through the list of X-Men and, we can make it broader than X-Men. I mean, characters that are that prominent and that well known will
Uh-huh.
typically have a little bit of dirt on them. Will have a little bit of times where they didn't do the right thing.
Yeah.
Times where uh, where you look at the character and you're like, oh, I wish they didn't do that. Oh man, and then you kind
Yeah.
of have to, their fans or their stands or whoever kind of has to either ignore or make excuses for the
Yeah.
thing that the thing that they did. Shout out to Kitty Pride. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
Like Storm really doesn't have that, like she's so many checks in the right column, in the W column, and hardly any checks in the L column. So and somewhat I do think that can hamper solo storytelling, because often with solo storytelling, it's about overcoming your flaws, it's about
Mhm.
growing, like having a limitation and then exceeding that limitation, and doing that over time, and maybe sometimes backsliding. But the idea that these are characters that we love and we relate to, and we relate to them, in fact, often because of their flaws. I would
Mhm.
say that Storm, if you kind of put a gun to someone's head and said, "What are Storm's flaws?" Like,
I mean, she dated Wolverine. Like, nothing.
so her flaws, questionable taste in men.
Like they're like
message message for Black women out there. Message.
I'm not even against her being with white guys. Obviously there's people who root for a particular ship or whatever. I'm fine, like just across demographics, but particularly Logan. Are you sure, Aurora? Are you sure?
Well, I would say that's more of a come up for Logan than a than
Right.
you know. Speaking of come ups, I mean, we might as well talk a little bit about her former husband, I guess is the best way of saying that. T'Challa, he's
I
another
mean, her
character.
her 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 ex-husband, current side piece, I guess. I don't know.
I would say I used to joke that Storm and T'Challa were the prom king and prom queen of comic book blacks, and that they were, I think, paired together because their approval ratings were so high that who could possibly hate on that
Yeah,
pairing?
yeah.
Um, but it I would say that we can agree that writers have done a lot to flesh out T'Challa as a flawed character, more so than they've done with Storm. But unlike well, I would say unlike, but I mean similar to what I was saying before, there are a lot of fanboys, and I call them fanboys, who don't like when T'Challa is presented as anything but uh,
Well, I mean,
W's across the board.
yeah. I mean, you bring it up, and I was just about to say, like, yeah, this current writer for Black Panther is not getting rave reviews. I think that's a pretty good understatement. Like, there's a lot of people very mad about it, and I mean, you have the ability as a writer to choose what your trajectory is for the character going forward, but it isn't necessarily as substantial um to just kind of add more stuff. Sometimes you have to kind of revisit and recontextualize what's already there.
Mhm.
And I, as hard as it is to see T'Challa kind of taking L after L in this run, like it's been maybe what 9 issues, I think 9 or 10
Yeah.
issues of this current run, and yeah, he's kind of getting a lot thrown at him all at once and getting a lot of sort of backlash and people like up in his face telling him off.
Yeah.
But it was sort of and especially after he had already overcome the thing in terms of like getting his name back with Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda. Like, yes, I get it. You kind of want your character to sort of be the triumphant one because that's why you read their stories. But yeah, I feel like this is a an era that people can look back and appreciate
But
more.
I but I actually think that this is a common thread in T'Challa's stories. He's presented to us as, if he were a female character, we would call him a Mary Sue. He's presented as excellent in all things,
Yes,
and he is a literal king of a nation that is also a nation that is presented as also perfect in all things.
yes,
So
yeah.
like if you only told stories about how awesome Wakanda was and how awesome T'Challa was in Wakanda, there would be no stakes, there would be no sense of danger, there would be no sense of risk and loss. So
And there will be nothing else worth exploring. Right,
right.
exactly.
And even a lot of the same criticisms that are being lobbed at the Ridley run were lobbed at the early parts of the Ta-Nehisi Coates run of Black Panther, where again, his position as the guy who always knows the answer and always does the thing that needs to get done for the benefit of Wakanda, even if he
Mhm.
has to break rules and go, a little bit to the dirt to do a little bit of dirt to do it. He ultimately gets proven out. Like, you have to interrogate that in a well written story and in a three-dimensional story, and particularly with the Ta-Nehisi Coates run, the idea of a king, the
Mhm.
idea of having absolute rule over a people that are supposedly uh, better than that in a lot of ways.
Right,
you
right.
know
Exactly.
um
You have them as like the most technologically advanced nation in the world and all this other stuff, but at the same time they are um up until T'Challa, they're essentially, they're an isolationist nation with a monarch.
yeah, and not just
So
any monarch, a monarchy that is defined by who wins in ritual combat.
right.
I
Like, I
mean,
mean, that's pretty yeah. So I mean, I'm not gonna get over into like the Inhumans, but like
yeah.
it's kind of sort of problematic in that
Well,
sort
yeah.
of
I mean,
similar vein.
at the risk of sounding problematic, one might call that primitive. One
I
might
mean, like
say,
it's we're trying to in our own lives sort of you know seeing sort of how politics are going right now, it's particularly present in our minds that autocrats and kings and dictators aren't great. So you can't turn around and say, well, it's okay if it's the black guy. Like, no, no, we still have
well,
to question that. And I feel like the solution that they came to in terms of how the nation is run, had it been written by somebody black back then, we might have come to that conclusion a little bit sooner. I'm just saying, wouldn't have, back
well,
the 60s or whatever, that wouldn't have been.
I
I
mean,
don't think it would have been there.
probably, but one thing that I will say, I mean, we've talked many times about the Christopher Priest run of Black Panther,
Hmm.
and how it's not my favorite, but I have to acknowledge that he did a lot for how the character is regarded
Yeah.
by not just Black fans, but fans of Marvel, to begin with. I know that Batman is a controversial character in our discussions when we talk about prep time, and we talk about his ability to come out on top in
Hmm.
every situation. I would say that before Priest's Priest Black Panther, Marvel didn't really have a Batman in that sense, in that prep time, always wins way.
Well,
And
at least not in that sort of conventional sense anyway. Like it was because I mean we had um Black Panther sort of like he dressed down the Fantastic Four in their first meeting. So I mean, yes, that was an impressive thing, but it wasn't like consistently Black Panther was just doing stuff like that. Like that was
exactly.
sort of a yeah.
But I would say post the Priest run,
Hmm.
it became kind of part of the,
Right,
if you want to take things all the way to the Stan territory, you know, who would win in a fight between Black Panther and blah 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 blah. You can like the concept of Wakandan
argument
prep time,
was much stronger. Yeah,
right? The
yeah.
concept of Wakandan prep time could be put into play. His
Hmm.
ability to anticipate and strategize around any opponent. There's
It,
that famous
it,
panel of where you know where someone said where he's fighting, I think one of the members of the Black Order, and
mhm.
the person says that they've trained their whole if I may paraphrase, train their whole life, for this very fight, very opponent. And he says, "Well, I have trained my whole life for any opponent." And he
I mean,
comes out.
and there's a few years later where we get like I think it's in Ultimates or it might have been like in Black Panther's run at that time where it was like we sort of see just as like part of the story. A matter of fact, I think it was the first run of the more recent iteration of the Ultimates,
Okay.
the 2015 run, and we kind of see him going through like files or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, you just kind of happen across that he has a file of like his contingency for Galactus. Like,
Exactly.
oh, okay, sure, yeah, that's
He's the
good to
guy.
know.
Yeah, he's the character that has the contingencies against against all the other characters. And I think it was Earth Mightiest Hero cartoon where he sort of takes down all the Avengers. So I given that aspect of his character, given how that character is regarded, it does make sense that if we think about his rest in peace to Chadwick Boseman,
Mhm.
how he was depicted in the MCU, there's still a group of people who feel like he was short shrifted in
Yeah.
his solo movie because it wasn't just T'Challa racking up L's, I mean racking up W's for the whole movie. He had to lean on women. Oh my God, women! Like he had to, get the help of his allies and of his family in order to come out on top. It wasn't just competence porn, you know.
Yeah.
But I do think that, like we said before, I think that in terms of creating a more well-rounded and three-dimensional character, having him be flawed, having him have things that are blind spots and things that are limitations that he has to reach back into the people who are also competent in their own right to
Hmm.
to ultimately come out on top. I don't think that that's detrimental to the character, but I can understand why, if you're a stan for a character, or if your enjoyment of the character is in seeing them come out on top, because perhaps we can understand that this is sometimes escapist entertainment. So seeing a character that you identify with, you know, persevere, or not even persevere, but overcome the obstacles fairly easily, is a lot different from what we have to experience in day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely an argument to be made for um characters who sort of have that ongoing winning streak. I feel we could probably be okay with more of the flaws and more of the shortcomings if there were more prominent black women. Like you wouldn't be like, oh well, you're kind of putting all your hope in Storm. It's like, okay, well, Monica Rambeau is, you can kind of see like, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have really the sort of
Visibility.
It's not as it doesn't hurt quite as bad. Like I could see, like if you have her as the only black woman there, then it's more in your face when she kind of takes the, like, say for example, I had I'm trying to think, it was Legion of X, or it was something fairly recent. I don't think it was Legion of X, but it might have been like I know
X-Men
that
Red.
I know it was in this Krakoan era.
Okay.
The introduction of the mutant character Lost, and when we see her, it was like she was, for anybody who doesn't know the character, she has the ability of basically her body hosts a gravity well
Mm-hmm.
that, like, often is sort of a running joke. Anybody gets too close to her, they just start uncontrollably vomiting. So, like, okay, fine. But on top of that, when you first see her, her body is like really just in bad shape.
Right. I
And
think she was in Way of X. I think
yes,
that was a
I,
Nightcrawler book,
I
right?
believe so. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So she, not only does she have these gravity powers, but her body, as a result, I guess, as a sort of a secondary mutation to sort of adapt to that, is that she has this really elongated body, really
Mm-hmm.
long limbs, really long torso, really long legs, and all of that. But when you see her, I think her power has been deactivated. So, like, her body basically can't support itself. She's
Mm-hmm.
really distorted and like hunched over, and she just can hardly move, and she's in terrible pain. And she wants to go through the crucible so that she can be reborn, have her mutant abilities returned to her. So when I saw her, it's just like her journey up until that point was like, dang, her introduction is just nothing but kind of like trauma. That's like the way that we saw her. That's the way she was introduced. Was like she's in this really traumatized and painful, and it looks visibly painful state. And the solution is that, I believe it's Apocalypse. She wanted Nightcrawler to be the one to help her out, but I guess he was too busy, and then ended up being Apocalypse, who if you know what the Crucible is, it can be a vicious sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So she ended up being brutalized by Apocalypse. It's traumatic to think about. It's not cute when you see it. The panels are like, okay, wow, that's a lot, So it is sort of in that vein that I think, when you have a character who is sort of the only sea of, the one little speck of melanin in the sea of kind of, the only other folks you see are like blue and purple and white. you know it stands out when somebody gets the short end of the stick. And I don't have a problem with it narratively, but you can't help but sort of think about it and internalize and be like, it sort of resonates more, just because you didn't really get sort of the mirror of that, of somebody who was functioning relatively well, or kind of had a comfortable position, or just, it just sort of stood out as like she's the only black person there, and then also goes through all of this sort of horrible stuff. I mean, she's better now, but
Right. Yeah, and if we can talk about the kind of other side of the coin,
mhm.
almost the exact opposite other side of the coin. Shout out to the introduction of the Araco
Yeah.
mutants, because I wouldn't say that they're all coded as black, but a lot of them are coded as
The
black.
important ones are coded as black. That's
And
what we're taking away here.
and shout out to the color purple. All my life I had to fight, because that is essentially the ethos of the Araco mutants. They had it rough, they came up hard,
Yeah, yeah.
and shout out to Iska the Unbeaten.
Hmm.
you know, our we stand a queen.
Exactly, exactly.
Another black woman, who, we want to talk about Storm not taking L's. Well, there's a character whose very power is inability to take the L.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think it's amazing that there's a character like that exists, and they still find a way to make her interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and I love the fact that they made that character black. So this is an example of, this is kind of like not quite in the purview of the racial draft, because these are new characters, and it's an example of the kinds of characters that could have been created all along, if there was more of an eye towards diversity and more of an eye away from this, sort of white default. Obvious, I really believe that if this character was created 15 years ago, they wouldn't even have considered making them black. They would have called, or even tried to code them as black.
Yeah,
And once again, representation would have hurt, would have been harmed by it.
yeah. I mean, like, there's just it's very the ethos of their culture and all of that. It is a really interesting contrast, particularly not, I mean, not just because like it's a new thing, but they sort of reflect a lot of what black and brown folks I've spoken to or seen talking have said in reference to the X-Men generally. Like, they are not interested in, I mean, it is very interesting that they sort of the X-Men came into this new sort of ethos at the same time that the Araco mutants are introduced. But for the longest time, the sort of exalted point was that Charles Xavier's dream was for the mutants to integrate and live peacefully side by side with humanity. And Araco, they're like, no, we're not, that's not a thing. We don't have any interest in that. Your little friendly, flowery, cutesy stuff, that's weakling foolishness. We don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And
And I would say that it's important because obviously, we've talked before about what Krakoa means in the context of the older kind of X-Men ethos, but
mhm.
the almost inherent in their rejection of the dream is the idea that in order to live side by side among non-mutants, they would have to kind of uh, sub what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, they'd have to subsume and kind of hide their gifts and diminish themselves and not be
Well,
their full selves
right,
in order to make non-mutants feel safe, in order to make non-mutants feel comfortable around them, and
right,
they have
right.
no
And
desire to do that.
and sort of to branch off of that, to sort of draw the real life parallel, you get basically sort of this political overtone of like, why should you try to befriend the people who think that you are not like a full human, or
True.
that you don't deserve the rights of a full human?
Yeah,
Or like, why
or even deserve to live. I mean, if we're
right, why should you try to find the middle ground with them? Because like, if you fully concede to them, then obviously it means death. But even if you meet the middle ground, it means that you are, basically letting yourself, you're compromising yourself. And that's what a lot of fans have basically been saying, even before we got into like the doomscape that we're currently in with the political parties. Like, why should they? And that is a very interesting sort of reflection in terms of the fact that we have the Krakoan nation established in this particular socio-political climate, and at the same time sort of seeing the Araco mutants in as something to see that basically was never in a position of aspiring toward compromise. So I feel like there, you agree or disagree with a lot of the particulars, but at least that sort of landscape in terms of the storytelling is very interesting to be put on display at this particular time.
Right. And and kind of tying it to what we were saying before, is that because the majority of the characters are coded as, if not outright depicted as, people of color, it
Mm-hmm.
allows these discussions to be had in a way that's a lot more organic to the story than if all of a sudden these long-standing characters, who for the most part are white, we're having these abrupt shifts in worldview.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have Bobby Drake in particular, who was like he was one of those folks who was able to sort of complain to his mutant family. He could kind of complain about like, oh gosh, my dad who voted for Trump, but not the second time, you know. And like you sort of have that thing where certain people will have these friends and these family members that they complain about, and then uh certain other of us with melanin are like, and you still associate with them, is what you're
Yeah.
telling me. So
And
you know.
and again, I mean, this is where the diversity comes into play in a good way.
Mhm.
By not having all the mutants, or sorry, by not having the vast majority of the mutants be white and have their stories be centered, you can allow for Bobby's story to actually stand out as a story that is resonant for a particular kind of person and particular
Yeah.
kind of fan, and not be just the story.
Right.
That it's a story, and it is valid, and it is a reflective of someone's experience, but it's not the dominant paradigm of what it is to be a marginalized person. Let's face it, Bobby Drake is the kind of character that, he's got two marginalizations, right? He's a mutant and he's also gay, but both of those marginalizations are things that he can hide. They're things that
Yeah.
he can move through the world, with privilege, if he doesn't just show um, these things that people would hate him for.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and that doesn't mean that those marginalizations aren't real. It just means that he has the ability to kind of turn it on and turn it off in terms of what his appetite for conflict might be.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that puts him in a profoundly different role than the mutants that are people of color, that even if they even if you can't see their powers, even if you can't see their powers, they're still black and brown or Middle Eastern people in the world, and they
Yeah.
still
I
have to deal
mean,
with that.
if you get somebody throwing a rock at you and like cursing at you and stuff, Bobby Drake can be like, they hate me because I'm a mutant. But but if Sync catches a rock to his forehead, he's got to be like, do they hate me because I'm a mutant or because I'm black or both?
Right.
So I mean, yeah.
And a character like Charles Xavier, and we've talked about this before, but a character
Hmm.
like Charles Xavier, his ethos is, well, maybe if your powers didn't threaten them, maybe they would not treat you like a threat. Like if you showed them that you could use their powers to save lives rather than take lives, then they wouldn't hate us.
Right,
And
but
it's a very respectability
right,
centered worldview. And again, it
right,
doesn't mean
and
that. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I just was saying, because of sort of the respectability ethos, I think that was sort of what um even though he does operate in the world through privilege, the fact of the sort of respectability and also his telepathic powers, which we've seen he doesn't always use for good. Sometimes he's kind of sneaky and slick about it. I feel like that's sort of the thing that allows him the potential to be written as a black man if they wanted to, or somebody, not necessarily just black, but just somebody with melanin, because he is someone who has the ability, he has sort of the cheat codes to kind of be like, oh, well, what can I do that they will not think of me as a threat? Or maybe I can kind of tweak their emotions a little bit so they won't react to me in such a way. And,
Yeah.
I feel like he's in a unique position to sort of navigate the world much easier than someone whose powers are, less invasive and intrusive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, well, I would say his powers are particularly invasive and intrusive. It's just that his powers, because they're not visible,
Mm-hmm.
um, he can see um their bigotry before he can see it coming
Right.
almost. you
Yeah.
know like because we don't read minds, or because other mutant characters don't read minds, it gets snuck up, they get snuck up on. A group of people show up and they're like, wait, I thought you were cool, and it turns out you're not, because you're beating my ass. You know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas, Charles Xavier can be like, I'm picking up a little bit of discomfort. Maybe I need to, subtly or subconsciously even, resolve that discomfort.
Right. Exactly. And
You know,
and there's the option to like passively receive those thoughts, or actively like just sit down and sleep for a little bit. Like it's fine. Just just
it's funny. It's like we think about it a lot, that like one of the big things that happens in the X-Men movies is that Charles Xavier just hits the pause button on the world,
yeah.
and like he can just do that to people, just sort of stop things before it gets out of hand. And just that as on its own, kind of the ability to de-escalate a conflict non-violently, would definitely preserve someone's desire to think that most problems can be solved non-violently.
Mm-hmm. It's very easy to to do that. Like, yeah, sure. Don't worry. That it's fine. You can as yeah, says the guy who can make people stop mid sentence. Like,
Right.
sure.
Mid assault. It's like like the mid slur. You can just remove the slur from happening. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's great. Person with the ability to do that versus
Can
the
you at
person.
least tell me whether or not he was going to use the hard R? At least let me know that part. Like,
Exactly. um but yeah, that's and to the extent that we have these discussions about these characters, it's good to talk about, I think it's easy to say, well, this character should be white because he moves through the world with a bit of privilege,
mhm.
and he would only see the world the way he does if he were white. And I don't think that's the case. I think that there are a lot of examples of people who have some degree of privilege and are marginalized in other ways, and they still want to fit in. They still want to live
Like,
harmoniously.
because the whole point that we see, like, not even just comic wise, but just like in just our everyday, you see celebrities who are black or brown, or you see, just anyone, honestly, like, regardless of sort of their status and their station in life, you can see people with melanin who kind of are that way.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. Like, you can see some who are like, well, why did he resist when the cop
Mm.
came up to him without
Yeah.
probable cause? Like, I mean, they do that. We get into those arguments
Sure.
all the time on social media.
Right, but and even without talking about the people who are, who kind of are on the wrong side of history,
Hmm.
the people who mean well will say, right? So like, if you're in politics,
Hmm.
if you're in an institution of higher learning, like, I would say that if you came up through any of the sort of dominant institutions and continue to engage with those institutions, there's a
Yeah.
part of you that wants to resolve things within those institutions rather than tear those institutions down.
Right.
Like it makes sense that, I mean, he went to Oxford for God's sake. You know what I mean? Like he sees himself as an accomplished person, and
Mm-hmm.
he thinks that it's possible to um he doesn't think that it's necessary to destabilize the entire system in order to
Right.
for his people to be free. And again, a lot of people think he's wrong, um, and but it's not 100% that he's wrong, especially when his arch enemy is someone who he's a little disingenuous in terms of what he wants. you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
Um, Magneto does talk that revolutionary talk, but a lot of the rhetoric that he uses is the same rhetoric of the oppressor.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like, I mean, it seems at the outset that he's sort of fighting for mutants to have their seat at the table when really he wants the mutants to be the ones that humans have to sort of fight for their seat at the table. He wants to be in that position of sort of holding the levers of power.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it again, you have some people who who just sort of feel like, yes, bigotry is bad and wrong and all this other stuff, but rather than trying to affect change by this sort of forceful way, um, you should try to change it from the inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounds like, white people, a lot of folks sort of say that in terms of political discourse or whatever, but they're not the only ones saying it. And so I don't feel like that was like when I think I forgot when I drafted him, but
Mm-hmm.
um that was sort of my thought process when we had that discussion, because he is somebody who again is in that very unique position, and I feel like I still have my feelings like I want Colin Salmon or somebody black, somebody brown to portray him this time around, because it is a very interesting position that he occupies, and it can stir a deeper discussion than he's having.
Yeah, and if we may, we've talked about this before, but it is a rumor that Giancarlo Esposito, we know that Giancarlo Esposito would like to play Charles
Mm-hmm.
Xavier. We don't know whether that casting has in fact happened. It's interesting. It's been interesting to see the collective blogosphere's reaction to it, which is generally positive. The you
Yeah.
know the But I think that may have something to do with the fact that uh, a lot of people's opinion of Charles Xavier has diminished over the last few years, and they
Yeah.
think of him as almost a villain now, which is
Mm-hmm.
unfortunate. Because the reason that they like Giancarlo Esposito playing the roles because they associate him with villainy.
Yeah.
Um, but but I think that there is a way to create depict him in a way that is much less saintly, but still overwhelmingly meaning well and
Yeah.
wanting good, even if he, again, like we said before, having foibles, having flaws, uh, having good intentions, but not always doing the right thing in the face of those good intentions is what makes for a more complex and a more intriguing character.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I guess this is a combination of talking about a story, new story, while also talking about staying in the realm of the racial draft. Let's talk about a character named Danny Rand. Uh, I don't know how current you are in the Iron Fist comics and comic lore, but there is Danny Rand is not currently the Iron Fist. We can talk a little bit about what it meant for Danny Rand to be the Iron Fist, but currently Lynn Lee is the Iron Fist, and Danny Rand is Lin Lee's new mentor. He was, I think that sometimes what happens when these new characters come into the fray and take a mantle, it's a temporary thing. But I think the sense of things in the Marvel tent, so to speak, is that Danny Rand is out as your as your Iron Fist, but he will still exist, and he will have his experience of being the Iron Fist, and he will share that with his young protege. First of all, what are your thoughts about the Lindley character? Do you have a lot of experience with the Lindley character
Well, I have been basically with Lin Lee since he was introduced.
as
He
Swordmaster?
had Yeah, he was
Okay.
Swordmaster and he was part of the new Agents of Atlas. And his solo was interesting. I wish it had gone on longer, but you know it was very interesting to see him. Like it felt since his introduction that they wanted to do more with him. It didn't feel like he just was kind of a solo, um sort of one shot character.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to see him in his own solo. He was teaming up with Shang-Chi and like crossing paths with Ares, and like he was part of New Agents of Atlas, like I said before, and
Mm-hmm.
also part of the Atlantis Rising, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was really interesting when he died off in or at least appeared to have died in the death of Doctor Strange White Fox tie-in comic.
Now,
And then
if I can interject for a second, he's
uh,
from Shanghai, right? Is that correct?
I don't remember exactly where, but I do know he is Chinese. Yes.
Okay, let me look that up. But keep going.
Yeah, so then we turn around in the next week or couple of weeks or so, and then they're like, oh yeah, there's a mysterious new Iron Fist. I bet you guys will never guess who it is. And I'm like, I have a guess. you know I got an idea, bro. you know and it felt to me that I don't know if this is the consideration, but if so, it's pretty freaking good consideration that they had this character Lin Lee, who he obviously they don't want just like one Asian guy. Shang-Chi doesn't have to be all things to all Asian people. So if you want to elevate new Asian characters, then you try to find out where they best fit. That's sort of step one of the consideration here.
Mm-hmm.
And then step two, they already know that Swordmaster, he may not be catching on as well as we wanted him to. We kind of, we had an idea and it didn't quite click. But you also have Danny Rand sort of in that same time frame getting all of this backlash of like, especially how he was treated over on the Netflix show. Like,
Yeah.
that was, that
Mm.
shone a light that people who wouldn't have read the comic, they were weighing in because they're able to see it on the show.
Right.
So you get
Yeah. I
comic,
mean, I
but
think
then also the show watchers too.
yeah, I mean, I think it's important though to talk about Danny Rand because I have complicated feelings about Danny. I know that there are different camps with
Mhm.
respect to the Iron Fist. I think that that among hardcore comic fans, uh, there's a run of Iron Fist solo comics by Matt Fraction, the Immortal Iron Fist run, which a lot of comic readers swear by,
Mhm.
and they feel like that is the definitive Iron Fist run, and that all Iron Fist depictions need to sort of pay homage to and um, you know deference to this version of the character. But I'm and while I acknowledge that that run was very exciting and very interesting, I happen to think that that has not been the majority of the character's time in existence. And I think that that character, that Danny Rent in particular, you know, he's not without his problematic elements,
Mhm.
But I would say that the majority of his problematic elements were in his origin. And once you got past his origin, he really wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Um, because you paired him with characters who constantly interrogated what he represented.
Hmm.
And if you're gonna have a white character that is cosplaying as, I kid a little bit because he's not cosplaying. He obviously has trained and he knows all the martial arts. But he's wearing Asian accoutrements. He's draped himself in symbology that is associated with Asian martial arts, and he was, in his backstory, he was raised in, sort of brought up in an Asian place that, you know, obviously there's a bad way to do it where he fits all these different tropes and stereotypes of, well, now because I grew up around Asians and I learned their ways, I can be the best of them because I'm a white guy who knows all their ways,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and again, if that were his experience in comics for the last 20 or 40 years, as it were, then that would be one thing. But the truth is, he was almost immediately paired with Luke Cage, who doesn't stand for that shit.
Right.
So for the majority of his time in existence, he's been, and not to mention, Misty Knight, who he
Uh-huh.
dated for a long time, and Colleen Wing, who is an actual Asian character who's not going to stand for some white guy mansplaining martial arts. By making him the white guy, the well-meaning white liberal who occasionally oversteps, but he has people of color that are willing to check him and make him check his privilege. I actually thought you know that he had a great role to play in these storylines because of those factors. That Danny Rand on his own without being checked is a
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
Is a problem. But Danny
Yeah.
Rand constantly being checked by the people, his friends and peers, is actually a valuable character.
Yeah, and as somebody, I have not read a whole lot of, I haven't read any solo Danny Rand, but at least from what I've read of like the Defenders, the recent Defenders comic, you know,
Heroes for Hire. Have you read any of
some
that?
I've read, I think maybe the Power Man and Iron Fist, I believe it was 2016 run. I forget
Okay.
which one, but yeah, it was fairly
The
recent.
David
But
Walker
yeah,
run, you mean?
yes.
Okay.
And so yeah, I mean, I can agree that basically he sort of is more enjoyable because he's surrounded by folks who are sort of like, able to check that aspect of him and remind him that yes, you were steeped in Asian character and Asian culture, but you are still a Caucasian. So yeah, I can agree with that. Just to sort of pivot back to Lin Lee for a second, though,
Okay, sure. Yeah.
um, I feel that Lin Lee was the resolution to at least the optics
Yes.
of not having a prominent Asian like, I mean, because not only did they not have sort of a prominent Asian person other than Shang-Chi, like, I
And
mean,
even
we're
at that point, Shang-Chi wasn't as prominent.
right, exactly. So you were gonna have one of the most prominent Asian themed characters not be Asian.
Right.
Like it is problematic, and like you can't, it may not be to the degree of something that's like a racist depiction, but the origin is problematic and it gives room for, you know, some potentially problematic stories to be told,
Yeah.
especially if you get him into a solo context.
But that's
And,
why
and
I thought that, and I think I don't know if we talked about it on a podcast, but
mhm,
I always thought that um it was misguided to do a solo Iron Fist show because of what you said, that you can gloss. I mean, we've seen with Marvel that they've introduced characters and not spent time building up their origin story, of just kind
mhm,
of saying, giving us the character fully formed, and then maybe giving us 1 or 2 episodes where they go back and they show how the character came to be, but letting the character kind of exist and interplay off of other characters.
mhm.
But like, I still maintain that you could have just had Iron Fist be a supporting character in the other character stories, and he would have been more well received, because those dynamics that I talked about before would have been at the forefront,
Yeah,
instead of
but
selling us instead of selling us on the idea that this, hey, look how awesome this character is, this white
mhm.
guy that has these Asian symbolic these Asian symbols, that does martial arts, and then again, in the show, his martial arts skills were not up to par,
Right.
right? So,
Yeah.
whatever it is that you thought that you were doing, whatever it is that you thought was going to be the appeal of the Iron Fist solo series,
Mhm.
the all of the benefits, sorry, none of the benefits, and all of the flaws. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and but at the same time, it highlighted a thing that needed to be addressed. And so that is, I feel that's why we got Lin Lee. Like, they felt like, okay, maybe he's not doing that great as Swordmaster, but people do like his chemistry with Shang-Chi. They like his chemistry with these other characters and stuff like that. And so we still want to do something with him. And so, ta-da, we killed two birds with one stone. We get Danny Rand kind of in that he's there, but he's not the most prominent voice, which that was, as we're discussing now, that's sort of the issue, that he was a prominent kind of voice there, and like people had to constantly check him. Where now you have this Asian guy, young Asian guy. Okay, um he still has Danny as a mentor, but it's going to be less like I am teaching you the Asian ways, and it's going to be more like I am sort of your big brother, and I learn from you, and you learn from me. And so I
yeah.
feel like that's really a great sweet spot for him to be accepted more as a character.
Mhm.
Um, for him to have prior been in that role prior. Okay, fine, yes, we're going to pay attention to that and we're going to respect that, but yeah, we need to move on beyond the problematic dynamic.
Yeah, no, that I can agree with that, and it is good. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with the character going forward, but at least in
Mm-hmm,
this current run, this current Iron Fist series was written and illustrated by an Asian American creative team.
mm-hmm,
So, that's important. It would it's probably going would be important going forward to have that dynamic be written by an Asian American creative team,
mm-hmm.
for that reason, so that it wouldn't, again, back to the whole, white mansplaining of Asian culture. You don't want to have his role be the guy who knows better
Right,
than the,
exactly.
but again, he's the mentor, so they are going to be, in order to be an effective mentor, he is going to have some level of expertise that he can
Mm-hmm.
share with his mentee. Um,
And frankly, like again, I have to sort of, now, mind you, this is my first time reading a an Iron Fist comic. Was the introduction of Lin Lee. So but I will say, with that in mind, I did read Swordmaster, and I like that, at continuing forward. I like that not only does he have Danny Rand, he also has Shang-Chi.
yes.
So again, that's like, you sort of let folks talk whose experience is sort of more prominent in that, and rather than having like, you know, I don't know. It just the dynamic there is like I'm part of the solution. I'm not the solution itself,
Yeah,
and it
I
feels
can
much
respect
more
that.
respectful that way.
Sure. And the thing is, and we talked about this on another outlet, to the extent that Shang-Chi has had his glow up, both in the movies and in the comics with respect
Hmm.
to the Ten Rings.
Yep.
Um, Shang-Chi is actually probably more powerful now in canon than Iron Fist ever was.
Yes. Yes.
So now even if you put Shang-Chi and Iron Fist, or sorry, Danny Rand in a book together, there's just no competition in terms of who's the bigger deal.
I mean, not that there was ever, like, I mean, the one of the funny things that we kind of got out of I believe it was Priest's run, but maybe not quite Priest's run of Black Panther. The little mention of, I think it was Black Panther says it
Mm-hmm.
to Luke Cage or something like that. He's like, you don't, Danny doesn't. One of them says it. I forget who
Mm-hmm.
said it, but like
Yeah.
you, Danny doesn't know who Shang-Chi is. Like, oh, he kind of never brought him up. Like,
Yeah, but
yeah,
no, I get that. But I mean, I was more saying in the realm of, um, like the
oh,
prominence,
like
the
fan sort of
yeah,
recognition, or yeah, okay.
the prominence of Iron Fist. Not to say that Shang-Chi didn't exist, because he
Mm-hmm.
did, but he wasn't showing up in as many stories.
True.
He wasn't taking part in these big events, alongside Avengers and stuff like that. He wasn't on these Avengers teams.
Yeah,
Like a lot
yeah.
of people thought of Shang-Chi as a street level hero.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would say he's definitely leveled up beyond just being a street level hero, where I think we would be perfectly fine with Danny Rand as a street level hero, because now he doesn't have the Iron Fist. He's just a guy who can fight really well. Like
I mean,
he's
I wouldn't mind if he took up some other costumed identity, but sort of in that same vein, I'm gonna slightly diverge away and say that I hope that someone actually Japanese will end up in the role of Ronin. Like, I don't know who.
oh
I
no,
hope
see, here's
eventually.
the thing. I am actually fine, especially because we didn't talk about this aspect. Danny Rand's
Mhm.
a billionaire.
Yes.
You know, he's not Tony Stark, obviously,
Right.
but he runs a pretty prominent, uh, you know, multinational corporation. Like
Mhm.
he's supposed to be kind of famous.
Yeah.
Like you can just have a famous dude who can fight really well. Like it's really cool. Like he doesn't need to wear a mask, is what I'm saying. Like
that, that's fair.
like at this point he can just be like he can still wear the suit if he wants, like the old suit, you know
That's
just
kind
as
of funny.
but
I'm I'm just kind of like imagining like the dad who's kind of like out of shape and retired is like he's like all the other guys are like suited up, and he's like, yeah, the old high school uniform still fits. I can still go out there.
yeah, exactly. I was thinking about more like a retired athlete where it's like, hey, Jordan's lacing up the old sneakers. I gotta show these youngins I still got it.
Right.
Like so like I'm fine with, especially because again his best friend is Luke Cage, right,
Hmm.
who's now the mayor, like he's now the mayor of New York in comics, right? So like Luke, just the same way that Luke Cage is just Luke Cage, you know like we know he's got superpowers, we know he can throw down if need be, but like he's doing other shit. Like him and Danny can basically be like two guys who like used to be full-time superheroes, but like they're, like if the situation presents itself, then they'll have, they'll put the fight on. But Like
But
they're doing
about time. It's been too long since I've had a suit up montage.
exactly, but just, in the same way that Luke is like every young black superhero's like uncle, like,
Right. Yeah.
Danny Rand is like, hey, do you need I'm a billionaire. I don't know if you guys remember. So, do you need some financial support for your street level superhero endeavor? I can throw you some money so you can get this going. You know, it's like, and again, if he's at a business meeting and the hand shows up and they decide they want to try to take over his corporation, he can still kick ass with the best of them. Like I just think that there's room. I think there's room for evolution with the character, other as opposed to what some people feel, which I don't agree with, is that this character shouldn't exist. You
Oh
know.
yeah, I don't think that's the case. Like, I mean, you get characters sometimes who are problematic, whether they are intended to be that way or whether it just sort of incidentally happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, it may not even be something necessarily that's like canon, but just fans have sort of come to the conclusion. Like what's his name? Vance Astrovic,
Mm-hmm.
who goes by Justice, and he's perceived as kind of one of those mutants who he didn't really want to associate that much with the X-Men, and has sided with a lot of sort of um what fans perceive, and rightfully so perceived as like the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you sometimes you just get that reputation, and that doesn't mean that the character shouldn't exist, but the role that they serve is something different than what was originally intended, and that's okay. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're not like glorifying the thing that they are, um the sort of shortcoming that they have to address,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that it's perfectly fine that a character can persist. I don't love U.S. Agent. I don't like the character at all, but I don't feel like, oh, why did you add U.S. Like, it's fine. I know what he's there for. He's not
Yeah.
there to be like your fave character. He's there to sort of like foil or present a challenge for Hawkeye or whoever else is involved.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that there has been that, we've talked around it a little bit, but the
Mhm.
controversy about whether in presenting Danny Rand in live action, obviously we got it in Netflix. Um,
Mhm.
the idea of Danny Rand as an Asian American rather than as a white guy. I'll put my own view out there first, which is that I think that I do understand the criticisms, the tropes of the white savior and the mighty whitey. White guy goes to Asian place and becomes adept at their ways. I think that there are benefits to him moving through the world as a privileged, at least perceived white guy. Um, I know that there are people, some of whom we've mentioned on this very podcast, who
Mhm.
are of mixed background but are viewed as white. That people think that they're white, but until they find out that they actually have other ethnicities in their background.
Mhm.
I think that would be a savvy way of depicting Danny Rand, that he can move through the world as someone who is white passing, but
Yeah.
he actually has Asian culture. I'm sorry, Asian um, ethnicity, in his background, and he would still be kind of viewed at. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I've met people who are um, whose parents are were what were they? They were soldiers that served in Asia, and
Mhm.
they were Americans that either married or fathered children that were part Asian, and their children have to deal with that a little bit of stigma in those
Yeah.
countries of basically they're looked at as white in those countries, even though they're clearly not. Like, I think that that would be an interesting nuance to the Danny Rand character, where he's not white in the sense of he does have Asian, he is part Asian, but because of how he's treated, he may as well be white. You know, he's not accepted fully into Asian communities, and he's not, and he can still somewhat pass in white communities. And he might want to say, "Hey, wait, I'm part Asian," but people will be like, "Yeah, but you
But
gotta
how
tell,
part?
but you gotta like tell people that." You know?
Right.
And if you have to tell people that you're Asian, you're white. You
I
know what I mean?
mean,
Like, I think
yeah,
that that would be,
I
I
get
think that
that.
would be a good way of squaring that circle,
Yeah.
because instead of it being the trope of the white guy who goes into an Asian community and is better at them than the Asians are, it's a story, it's a more nuanced story of a person kind of rediscovering their culture, but still not being fully accepted by that culture.
Yeah. I think that, they yeah. I mean, especially since we didn't really like everybody, like whether you want to have a new white Danny Rand or a new Asian or a new Asian American Danny Rand, we all agree we don't want Finn Jones back. I think that's
Yes.
that's sort of the point we're getting
Yeah,
to.
correct. But I think that in terms of the dynamic between Danny and Luke,
Mhm.
I think that as much as we all love the Rush Hour movies to one extent or another, if Danny and Luke were a white guy and an Asian guy, the dynamic is totally different. Sorry, a black guy and an Asian guy. Are you still there?
Waiting for you to
Yeah,
catch it.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah.
You know, um, and again, going back to what I was saying before, with also Misty Knight and Colleen Wing, I think that you still want that four-way dynamic of him being the one that gets roasted in the crew.
Correct.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah,
like
and I mean, frankly, like my feeling has sort of always been even before the case was like laid out as it was, because some people have done like full threads and stuff of like what it would mean for an Asian or Asian
oh,
American
not
Danny
just
Rand.
threads. I mean, full on blog posts. Like
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
So even before that, I kind of felt like I don't need Danny Rand to be white. Like, I mean, if they, found, I mean, maybe they could try to be like, okay, well, as long as he's is still light skinned, but like, does he have to be white? No, not really. Like, even as a billionaire, there's folks who are up there who are wealthy and rich, and they're, they have melanin. So I feel like it is something that, you know,
but
there
like I
was
said,
no
I think
particular
I
benefit for
do
him to be
think
white.
that no, but I mean, like, again, not saying that he needs to be fully white,
Right.
but I think that in terms of his relationship with Luke,
Mm-hmm.
it's such a stark contrast. Traditionally, it's such a stark contrast. You have a white billionaire and a black man from the streets,
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah, I fully agree.
that I don't want to lose the essential parts of that dynamic. And I think that just being a billionaire isn't enough.
Yeah.
Like, there still needs to be the guy who, like, if they got into like an argument on the street, right, that the cops pull up and they're like, uh is this man bothering you, sir?
Right. Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like,
I
there needs to be sort of like that built in, like, even though he doesn't want it, right? That's the
right, right,
key,
right.
that he
That's
doesn't
fair.
want it, but like, it's there all the time. and he knows, and he's trying to make up for
And he knows, and his
it.
friends will not let him forget.
Well, yeah, that too. You know, and again, and what I like is that, like, I actually want him to be in Harlem because I want him to gentrify, and I want people to constantly get on him about, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, you know what you're doing, right? You're buying a property in Harlem and you're trying to make it nicer, but like, like you might not think that you're gentrifying Harlem, but you're gentrifying Harlem, my dude. And I know, like I said, I think that the way to square that circle is to make him Eurasian, Asian American, and also white American, but like to someone who doesn't have a discerning eye, they think he's white, and that will allow him to at least, that would be the nuance of it, where he could at least say, I mean, I'm part Asian, and then they could just basically be like, yeah, but
and and he just incidentally happens also to dye his hair blonde. That's not helping anything. Like,
true, exactly. It's like, hey, listen, I've been dyeing my hair blonde since I was a kid, so like that's just my thing. Like, so I don't know. Anyway, I mean, these are the kinds of things that could come into play in the racial draft, as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, if the white delegation were to draft Danny Rand, they would get all the smoke, but they could live with it because they're like, look, he's one of ours. We feel like his character continues to benefit from white privilege. We're not taking that away. Speaking of white privilege, well, not exactly. Harley Quinn, another character that we can definitely get into in the current season about whether she needs to be at least, white perceived. She's got a new comic. Well, sorry, a new run that's going to kick in. Her current comic is at issue 28, and no, sorry, her current comic um, will hit issue 28 on March 28th, so a few months from now, and they will get a new creative run. Teeny Howard and Sweeney Boo. Did you hear about this earlier, Randy?
I heard about it, but I haven't been reading the comic.
Yeah, I've sort of fallen behind on the comic as well, but I'm going to try to catch up, but before they start the new run. Harley Quinn is an interesting character because I would say she's one of the major success stories for, we haven't talked a lot about DC. We've really been staying in the realm of Marvel, so this is a good transition point. I would say that she is one of the kind of new phase of characters that DC has introduced that attract a fan base that is more Marvel like. Would you agree with that?
Um, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we can talk about the fact that she's one of the more, if not the most prominent lesbian characters, or at least, LGBT, potentially bisexual characters, I suppose, is probably a better sense for her. She's got her relationship or same-sex relationship with Poison Ivy, which not only has that been canon in the comics for quite some time, but it's been made canon in the cartoon, the Harley Quinn cartoon. Hasn't been made canon yet in live action, but people want it, and maybe it'll happen soon. I mean, we know that Margot Robbie is in favor of it, but so obviously she's still generally depicted as a white woman, Jewish white woman, but still white woman.
Hmm.
In the comics, we know that she's going to be depicted in another incarnation in the Joker sequel. Like, so she's up there in terms of prominent female characters, but and she does bring something to like the diversity table in terms of her being one of the prominent LGBT characters, but also, she's a very nuanced character. A lot of DC characters, which is probably why we haven't talked a lot about it. I mean, they tend towards this white default that we were talking about before. They tend towards this very kind of old school 1950s notion of of Americana, so to speak.
Mhm.
And it's one of the things that's made that fan base and audience kind of generally more conservative. Now, I will fully acknowledge that in recent years they've been doing their best to try to diversify more, but we can talk about those efforts. I mean, I know you're a DC reader, and I know you want well for DC. So I'll give you an opportunity to kind of get into it.
Well, my feelings are very bittersweet because yes, they are adding more black and brown characters. I won't deny that. We got, in the last, I want to say at least 15 years has been like we got Jakeem Thunder, we got Mr. Terrific, we got Darla Dudley, we got, and definitely like Nubia's gotten a glow up, and we've seen, a bit more of Nat Irons as Steel and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. and
But
don't forget Jackson Hyde.
oh yeah, for sure. And Naomi, and like, I mean, there's a lot of them. Ace West is people are really enjoying him. Duke Thomas, The Signal.
Wait, is Ace
Um,
is Ace West what Wallace goes by now?
yes.
Nice,
Um,
nice. Okay.
and yeah, because they were like, Wally Wallace. Why don't we just call him Ace? And
I
it's
can I
cool.
can respect that. I can respect Ace. Yeah, that can.
Yeah. So I mean, I see it, but at the same time, we don't have a whole lot of them that have their own solo comics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we Mr. Terrific sort of breaks that particular line of thought because he had the Terrifics recently. He was in a leading role in that comic, and it was really good. That's great. And Strange Adventures, he also was a prominent uh,
Mm-hmm.
face in that comic as well. And he's even gotten a role in the recent
Flash
Flash.
comics. Yeah.
Right. So okay, that's great, but we don't have a whole lot of solo stuff in terms of black and
Mm-hmm.
brown characters.
Yeah.
Nubia has gotten a couple of mini series and stuff like that, and Vixen still has nothing. Black Lightning last had Cold Dead Hands, which, frankly, in my opinion, it was written by the writer who actually created Black
I
Lightning, but
mean, we
it's
you got to shout out to Batman and the Outsiders. I mean, he was a
yeah,
lead on that book.
yeah. I acknowledge that, and I feel like that was sort of, even though again the original creator was not a fan of that run and not a fan of that portrayal. He was very vociferous about that,
Mm-hmm.
and was like, "Oh yeah, Black Lightning is like Batman's support Negro," which he's white, so please don't use that word. But for his complaints about the character in that title, I felt like that was a better characterization of Jefferson Pierce as a black man than in the title written by the guy who created him.
Yeah,
Like
and, and
in,
and
in
and again,
Cold Dead
tying
Hands.
into what we said before, that was a black man writing him.
Right. In
Yeah.
in 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 Cold Dead Hands, he sort of regressed Jefferson back to this kind of bachelor younger guy and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay, he has a certain idea of what he wants his character to be, and that's his business, is his character.
No,
But
but we've talked about this before. He created the character. That does not mean that it is his character to do with
well, I
what
I,
he
I
pleases.
say I say he created the character, and you still have to acknowledge that that does not mean that he should be, nor is he the only guy who has a say in how that character develops.
Right.
And if he is the only guy who has a say in how the character develops, and he chooses to regress the character or keep the character at certain at a stagnant point, don't turn around and be surprised when other people are like, that's the I wanted a black character that I can relate to. He doesn't really resonate for me. He
Yeah.
doesn't really move me
Hmm.
because he is like what this white guy thinks a flattering portrayal of a black man should be, as
Exactly.
opposed to us kind of like having the input and having like, some folks just kind of understand how to do it better than other people. And like you know, Tom King wrote Mr. Terrific in Strange Adventures. I still felt like, you know what? He's a white guy, but he did pretty good with Mr. Terrific.
Yeah,
I
he
wouldn't be
listen.
I wouldn't be mad.
Look, there are a lot of things that you brought up that I agree with. So I'll start off with talking about Tom King since that was the last thing you said.
Mm-hmm.
Like glowed, like he glowed up that character, like to at a level that a lot of black writers wouldn't have had the freedom to do. You
Right.
know, as much as the Terrifics was a fun book,
Mm-hmm.
I much prefer the Michael Holt, Mr. Terrific, as depicted in Strange Adventures, because I think that he's got more um, of an appeal as an individual solo character that way.
Well,
Um,
frankly, we got to see more of kind of the intimate moments. We
yeah,
got to see kind of like the him by himself alone with his thoughts.
yeah,
And that I felt like really allowed him to show. And even though it wasn't a black guy writing them, I felt like that was a really impressive portrayal. And had it been like announced at the end of Strange Adventures, like, oh yeah, Tom King's gonna be writing a Mr. Terrific comic, I would have been fully on board.
yeah.
I'm
As would I. So this is where I get on my soapbox. You've heard it before, but I'm going to do
Mhm.
it again. One of the problems inherent in DC Comics is that they they've got the Justice League and they've got these characters that have been long-standing mainstays in the universe, and they don't leave a lot of room for the characters that are not the
Right,
main seven
right.
Justice League characters. All
And
everyone else kind of has to like
main
get in. What do you say?
no, I was saying the main six because I think that's
Yeah.
seven. I think Shazam and Martian Manhunter are
They're
wrestling
probably
for that spot.
sharing exactly. Yeah, you're right. And I think that factor, the fact that they have to sort of get in where they fit in,
Hmm.
makes it hard for these, whether it's a black character or any character of color, um, like they're already looked at as superfluous
Yeah,
because they're not given a place to flourish. Even someone like Mr. Terrific, like one of the things that we talk about with Marvel is that it's never, even when the Avengers exist, they're never positioned as the only superheroes that that are necessary in the Marvel universe.
hmm,
um it's almost like the more the merrier, like more
right.
superheroes the better. If a new team rises up, they know how to position that team and to say that they are actually helping things out, they're
Right.
actually contributing and benefiting. But because you have a character like Batman, and I'm gonna, sorry Batman fans, you know who's positioned as like, oh yeah, I mean, if you give Batman all the resources, like he could just do his Batman thing and and solve all the problems on his own. You know,
Right.
maybe not in Gotham, but like everywhere else. you know, so like because you have Batman, it makes Mister Terrific feel like unnecessary, but he shouldn't.
Honestly, I don't feel like it makes him feel unnecessary. It feels like the editor's room is protective of him because he is not Mr. Terrific. Like Batman is supposed to like, okay, if you introduce a Mr. Terrific, then you have him all the time. Anytime he's written and has like Batman also on the scene, you see his intellect is not Mr. Terrific's intellect. That's just a fact. Every portrayal I have seen has been like, oh, well, Batman is kind of impressed by his technology, even though he kind of begrudgingly doesn't really say it. Or,
Right, but the
like,
problem is, no, I get that part, and I'm not necessarily talking about like the in-universe aspect of it.
mhm,
I'm more talking about like the reputational aspect of it. It's like because
yeah,
Batman is viewed as like the person that
the
solves
jack
all the
of all
problems,
trades. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
then you in a situation where Batman and Mr. Terrific are in the screen together or in
Hmm.
a panel together, it's like Batman is giving Mr. Terrific his like vote of approval, like
Right. Yeah.
he's like, oh wow, look at you speak so well.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
I understand.
Like they're not coming at the situation as equals because they're not perceived that way. They're not presented that way. It's Batman constantly kind of giving his grace to
Hmm.
Mr. Terrific and allowing him to operate rather than in a sort of like a Marvel type perspective where like organically, yeah, of course we need both a Batman and a Mr. Terrific. Of course we need both a Tony Stark and a Reed Richards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the more again, the more the merrier in the Marvel perspective. Whereas it feels like Batman's allowing Mr. Terrific to exist
Hmm.
more so than they have their own dedicated lanes where they are great and expert and when they collaborate they're collaborating for the to for the greater good.
Yeah. And what makes that so wild is that like the folks over in Marvel are operating in the same state as opposed to like Batman has all of Gotham to himself and still needs the wide breadth of kind of everywhere else to also sort of be the smartest man in the room.
Yeah, but it's because Batman's in the Justice League,
Hmm.
because if Batman were only operating in Gotham and just
Right.
begrudgingly occasionally helped out the Justice League, then Mr. Terrific could be that for the Justice League.
I mean, honestly, that's kind of the status quo that I've been wishing for years. Like, I mean, we always get sort of Batman trying to, we talk about all the time how he's like barely holding Gotham together. So like, why not dedicate full time to Gotham? Just leave it. Like, I mean, be kind of like the detective sort of consultant for the
Yeah,
Justice.
but again, we talk we we know even though they call it the Trinity, we
Mhm.
know it's more like the one plus one plus one, like
Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman are not on the same level of prominence, sadly.
yeah. But anytime you have a Justice League that doesn't have Batman in it, it doesn't
Right,
feel like the Justice League.
right, right. Yeah.
And they haven't figured out, which is why, I mean, again, not to get on my soapbox, which is why I just don't even want Mr. Terrific to be in the Justice League the same way that Marvel had the Avengers and the Ultimates, you
Hmm.
know like to have a team that to figure, again, they would need to figure this out, but to have a team that is composed of people who the Justice League wouldn't want, so for lack of a better
Well,
term.
well, as opposed to you not wanting to get onto your soapbox, I rather enjoy being elevated by my soapbox. So, like, yeah, I speak about Mr. Terrific on the Justice League purely in sort of the idealistic terms. Like, if I were the Kevin Feige or whoever of that universe and sort of defining what the paradigm is there, then that would be what I go for.
Mhm.
But yes, that problem is very real. Like there are certain, basically when people think of the Justice League, it's been so static for so long that generations would kind of be like, you know, the young people, the middle-aged people, the older people will be like, where's Batman?
Mhm.
Like that, you know, anybody would say that.
And well, and
So,
this is where I drop our favorite catchphrase, the hierarchy of power, is about to change, because as you know, in a little over a month's time, there
mhm.
will be a Black Adam movie which will present the Justice Society,
Yes.
and Mr. Terrific is in the Justice Society.
And that was gonna be sort of my follow-up there because
Hmm.
the Justice Society, for anybody who has not read the Justice Society, but maybe if you have read the Justice League, read the Justice Society. I'm trying to think what year it was. I think it was 1999 that it started. Jeff Johns, but that
Hmm.
run was it was so great, and it gives a very particularly different feel from that of the Justice League. Justice League feels like office kind of like work buddies and stuff like that, but the Justice Society feels more familial. It feels more sort of warm, and for me that made it more resonant, as you know, even though there's a number of them who are sort of legacy characters, which you know
Hmm.
some folks don't necessarily care for that, but for me, it sort of the addressing of the generational passing on of a mantle or what have you is something that is endeared to more than like, oh well, you are, you know, you sort of have big shoes to fill and we don't know if you're up to the task. It does feel very much like we're welcoming you in. We want to be there for you. We want to try to make sure that you're the best that you can be. And there is no sort of a lot of the sort of conflicts and egos and stuff that happens between characters on the Justice League doesn't necessarily happen in the Justice Society. There's a lot more
Yes.
cooperative feel there.
Yes, but one thing that I would say, and hopefully the movie does a good job of creating this dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the comics, the Justice Society isn't always, present
Right.
currently, kind of in the DC universe, DC world. Um, the Justice League is omnipresent. The Justice League is they're the Yankees, they're whatever, the celebrities of the universe. They're who everyone aspires to join.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to explain why the Justice Society exists, rather than just say that the Justice Society exists. That
Yeah.
they're explore what their lane is and what makes it different from the Justice League's lane. And I think that if you can do that adequately, if you can, whether it's them being somewhat of a covert team, that they do things maybe not as publicly as the Justice League does it, that there are threats that the people don't need to know about, but they are there to stop those threats, like however they decide to do it. I haven't really completely thought it through. The fact that they are an organization that has existed since before Superman, that has existed before the Age of Heroes, and is bridging these generational gaps in a way that the Justice League hasn't. However they decide to do it, I think it would be important to establish the Justice Society as just as important as the
Mm-hmm.
Justice League, but with a different lane.
Well,
And
I
then,
think there you sort of, that's sort of where you play into the kind of more personable and intimate aspect of the Justice Society. Like a couple of those members go to like regular school. A couple of them are like professors and teachers and stuff,
mhm,
and kind of are like, you know, people that are more closely aligned to the sort of average everyday people. Like, you know, Bruce Wayne is over in Wayne Manor, and Diana's in her nice little loft thing wherever that apartment is, and you know, I mean, they're just
mhm,
sort like, I think the only one who really out of everybody is sort of down to earth in the league I mean, Cyborg wouldn't count because he's sort of reclusive in terms of like not feeling good about his body image and all of that stuff, being part of Machine. And Flash maybe kind of fills that role, sort
Yeah,
of.
Barry
Maybe.
Allen. I mean, he's just like a cop, like.
What's not relatable about that? But I mean, like, yeah, you don't really get that from them. They're kind of
Yeah, but
removed from it
yeah, but
all.
I
And
don't know. I don't know if that gets you where you want to go, though. Because Michael Holt is a billionaire. Like
well,
you're
yeah, he
yeah,
is,
like
but
you're still
yeah,
you're gonna
yeah,
fall into
but
that.
I would still say that most of that team is sort of based in terms of like living among average people. Most of them, like at least kind of have some sort of connection to like just average everyday life. And so, you could argue that they are, I mean, and they're the Justice Society of America. I'm not sure if that serves them or hinders them. You might want to be
I
kind
would
of more broadly appealing, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I would agree with that, but unfortunately, the way that the abbreviation is set up, it's like
Right, right.
JSA, like
Yeah.
you call it the JSI or whatever, Justice Society International. All of a sudden, all the old school fanboys are not into it anymore. So
Join the
you're
organization.
Mhm. It's like you're sort of stuck in that respect. I mean, I
Yeah.
personally, I think that you know I think that the route, if I were doing it, and again, I haven't done all my research, I haven't even read the long run, and I know that there are people who swear by it,
Hmm.
um, but I'm. It's because I'm primarily concerned with like what resonates with like today's audience. Like I think that it would be really important and really useful for Michael Holt, Mr. Terrific, if he were associated with the Justice Society. And if we look at whatever the Justice Society is going to be in the aftermath of the Black Adam movie, um, like I think that there is definitely room to introduce Michael Holt alongside Black Hawkman. Thank you very much. Um, and Zaddy, Doctor Fate, and whoever else as this team of heroes that is kind of concerned with people not knowing who they are. They're not operating. They're operating more in the shadows than
Hmm.
than in than in the in the limelight. And it's not to say that they're doing it because they're up to some dirt, but it's just to say that certain threats might not need to be things that the people you know have to worry about. Certain threats are scary enough that again, like kind of like what I was saying with the ultimates, that you know solving problems before they become problems you
Or
know
yeah, in sort of that similar vein, certain things are like occurring at such a wide scale that maybe letting the public know would tip off the wrong people. Like you're not
right.
sure who you can kind of tell. Like for me, that sort of reminds me of like what I want for a solo Hawkman. Well, not solo, but like Hawkman and Hawkwoman,
Mm-hmm.
doing like the Shadow War thing. I would love to see that. Like, oh, the Thanagarians have been trying to enact this plan to take over, and we don't really know who's on the up and up.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I like that idea that they
Yeah.
can be kind of like not really sure, and so you don't really disclose everything publicly.
Yeah. And again, it's like to the extent that there are things that involve like the multiverse, and there are things that are like cataclysm, potentially reality altering,
Mhm.
cataclysmic,
Yeah.
having people like Dr. Fate, who obviously DC's Grand Wizard, as always, um um or having someone like Mr. Terrific who can monitor, what's happening in other universes, um, and but not necessarily want to cause a crisis. Maybe they can bring in people like Calvin Ellis from
Mhm.
another universe. Like the idea that the Justice League, they already have a Legion of Doom. Like they have arch enemies whose job it is to try to take them out. But the JSA doesn't have that, you know?
Yeah.
And part of why they don't have that is because they operate, in the fringes. I
And also a lot of their enemies like were killed back in World War II.
well, yeah, sure, that too. But I'm just saying, like, if they were out there in the public eye,
Hmm.
then enemies would rise up to try to oppose them publicly, the same way that enemies oppose like the Batmans and the Supermans and the Wonder Womans of it all.
They're drawn to how visible those characters are. Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, theoretically that could work, but mostly what I would like to get at is that yeah, let's have the JSA be more diverse than the Justice League. If that's what we're stuck with, right? If what we're going to be living in is a world where, these are the heroes that when people close their eyes and they say, "Oh yeah, the Justice League," it's like white person, white person, white person, white person, maybe black
Green
person,
person.
green person,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Like if we want to like introduce these other characters that are of different backgrounds, yeah, they could be part of the Justice League if they want, but if they
Hmm.
really want to like get the opportunity to shine, the JSA would be where that would go down. And
And that is how the JSA was kind of engineered anyway. Honestly, when we got this new iteration of the JSA, it was like, oh, we brought in Mr. Terrific, and he's the kind of like the leader of the team, and we also got Jakeem Thunder, and we also got Kendra Saunders, Latina, and they kind of did like it got more so later on. Now we have this new upcoming run is brought back Yolanda Montez and Beth
this
Chappell.
Wildcat,
And yeah, so they've gotten better since then, but that's kind of been their thing the whole time since this new era was introduced. And yeah, it absolutely could work.
yeah, and if you really wanted to sort of take it to like a different level, like the society aspect of it, where it's like they've got the legacy heroes as well,
Hmm.
and maybe there's an element of mentoring young diverse heroes so that they can take on the mantles later.
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
like now I granted that sort of ties into like the Teen Titans, which we really haven't talked about at all, but I think that there's, I don't know. I mean, like I said before, with DC, which is different from Marvel, the idea of a lane,
Hmm.
needing a lane to operate, is important, because if left to their own devices, then people will just retreat to the heroes that they already know,
Yeah.
and then leave the other heroes to have to act in the fringes.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, basically, DC has sort of painted themselves into this corner because you do want to bring in new audiences, but you also don't want, like, you've so fed into the long time audience who kind of wants things to stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they've kind of uh brought their little 90s throwback sort of theme right now. They're like, yeah, remember the 90s, which y'all loved and loved us for? Like, you know so they brought back they have their little theme right now of bringing back the 90s.
Yeah.
And conversely, they're doing stuff like that stupid round robin competition kind of thing.
Uh, well,
like
we're
like
we're of two different minds on that. Um,
like, okay, I will happily open the floor, but I just want to get this off my chest.
sure.
My my whole thing in terms of DC Comics is my frustration with them is based in the fact that it's not that they don't have characters to like, it's that the characters that I like are not the ones that they focus on.
Hmm.
That's sort of my frustration overall. So to see them sort of roll out all of these new interesting titles, including some where characters are getting their first solo ever at all, like
Hmm.
Jesse Quick was gonna potentially get one. Kid Flash has never had a solo anything, whether you're talking about Wally or whether you're talking about Ace. He's never
Mhm.
had a solo comic. Wildcat has never had a solo before. They introduce all of these things, and you're like, oh my gosh, all these great titles. And then they hit you with the kicker, now choose. Like that,
Yeah,
that to me was so frustrating. And it came down to exactly who you would expect it came down to. Was
yeah,
like freaking Robin. Like, oh yes, of course. The one thing that we need that we've
mhm,
been so deprived of for so long is more Robin content. Yes.
yeah.
Like
But what I would say is that unfortunately, you know, this is still a commercial endeavor,
mhm,
and it probably sucks to introduce a book and then hardly anyone reads it,
yeah,
and then it gets canceled. So one advantage of the round robin thing is that it's both a promotional um avenue because everyone's paying attention to the round robin thing,
yeah,
and a way of sort of market testing before putting out the book what the interest in the book would be. So
yeah,
theoretically, whatever book wins the round robin is a book that is going to get more financial support than the book that doesn't win the round robin,
yeah,
theoretically. Now, it would be great if all the book, not all the books, but at least like the top five, however many winners would get books, you know, and it wasn't
mhm,
just all or nothing. You know what I mean? Like I get
yeah,
that part, but I do think that um, they're at least leaving it open to the fans to say this is what we want.
yeah. I
Because
mean,
people say all the time that they want this thing, but
right.
then when presented with, if you had to choose between this book and this book, which is a real thing that people have to do when they have limited resources, right? They
Yeah,
look at what books are out this week and they're like, do I spend my, $5 on a Batman book, or do I spend it on this you know, like this book that I'm unsure about, that's about a character that has never had a solo run. You know what I mean? Like
mm,
it sucks, but these are real decisions that people are making in the marketplace, and they don't have unlimited resources, as we have talked about in other
that's true.
contexts. They
That's
can't they
true.
can't just like put the book out, or unless you want to see books get canceled after like two issues. That nobody wants that. I would rather fewer books come out but get the guaranteed 6 to 12 issue run
Hmm.
than all the books come out but then are at the risk of getting canceled quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's true. And Lord knows they definitely will kill it in like two issues and won't even give it the benefit of the doubt with like five. Yeah, I it sucks, but yeah, I do get it. And um I just
but
can't help thinking like,
but
why
one
don't
thing
you
that
sell
I
it to me if I can't have it?
but one
So
thing that I constantly kind of get at is that as readers, because we have to make these decisions, like if you signal to the market that the book is kind of um not irrelevant, that's not kind of what I mean, but like not essential, then that gives people an excuse to not read it.
yeah,
And a
yeah.
lot of times even a really good book doesn't really feel essential.
I mean, I don't particularly need it to feel like, I mean, as long as it's a character that I like and as long as the story is like a good story, then I don't know how many people kind of feel that way, but that's generally what I just go for. I'm pretty straightforward with that.
Yeah, but I think that that's more of a like once the book is over
Hmm.
consideration. Like if you wait until the run is over and someone says that was a really good run, then you can read it. But in terms of like on a month to month basis, I think that I think that the average reader is going to take a wait and see approach unless they think that they have to read it that week because again it's impactful.
Yeah,
And that's the struggle. That is the struggle with comics, that you know there's these different avenues to read. I mean, it's not unique to comics. It's kind of like TV shows as well. I used to say this all the time, back when Netflix was kind of like the only avenue for shows, when they were out of their broadcast run. There would
Mhm.
be these shows that would get one season and they get canceled, and then people would watch them on Netflix and they would love them on Netflix, and they'd be like, oh man, it's a shame that they canceled this show that I'm watching on Netflix that I didn't watch when it was on the regular linear television show, the linear television, whereas the linear television is how they make their money, you know like that's kind of how I feel sometimes about
And then
comics.
the pre-orders is how the comics sort of are
Yeah, it's
counted
like
for.
exactly. It's like nobody's well, not say nobody, like not enough people are pre-ordering, not enough people are buying them even when they're on the shelves. They're
Mhm.
reading them in trades or they're reading them on digital after the fact, when they're closer to free, not free, but closer to free. And
Yeah.
then the company is saying, well, we need to put out books that people feel like they need to read as soon as they drop, and we need to put out books that people want to pre-order. And that's a harder proposition to get people to
Mhm.
to sign up for books that they haven't even read yet.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's a tough slog. And tying how this ties into the racial draft, trying to bring it back home, is that when it comes to these newer characters, when it comes to these characters that are of more diverse backgrounds, they're skating uphill. They're not established characters. They're not put into these prominent storylines for the most part. Like I've been fairly current in the Jace Fox Batman book, for instance. You
Mhm.
know, I think it's a well-written book. I've really enjoyed the book, but because I know that what happens in that book does not really impact what's happening in the other books, it makes it easy for me to say, oh, I'll take a break. I'll catch up in a couple months when there's a few issues. When I got a little extra cash in my pocket, I'll buy like 3 4 issues at a time or whatever. And those are the decisions that people make that lead to the book getting canceled.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
I mean, it sucks that you're right, but you are. So yeah.
now what I will say, as a black comic book fan, like you'll never see me saying they should not have created this character.
Mhm.
Now I know that there's some people out there that are mutual friends of ours who don't see the appeal and feel like it doesn't matter, character shouldn't have been created in the first place. I disagree. I think that there are cool stories to be told with this new character, but because there's not that lane like we talked about before, I can understand why the character is inessential. Same way, like you were saying, like Ace West. He's not put into enough prominent storylines to um, make people feel like they need to be reading Ace West stories, and
Right.
hopefully that changes. But in the meanwhile, um, people do feel that way about Wally West, about Barry Allen, these long-standing characters that are, part of the,
More Wally West than Barry Allen. But yes, you're right.
you know, um, well, listen, Barry Allen's still in this television show. He's still in the movies. Well, movies, quote unquote. Um, like they're doing the work, is what I mean. And
But in reference to that point, um, I guess I sort of wanted to like input how like the shows and the movies do very much drive like the consumption of certain media. I'll say just because we have like not even just the synergy of what uh like Marvel does. Sometimes they'll like create a new comic based on whatever is coming up in the movies or whatever. But they sort of will have sort of the opposite effect where they will put out a thing, show, movie, whatever, and then fans will like go searching for back issues
Hmm.
of like featuring that character. And so I really like that. That is one thing that makes me feel optimistic about the JSA getting their introduction. Like there's a lot of great elements that are kind of coming together for the JSA to rise to like really big status here. Like
Yeah.
not only do we have the JSA being in the Stargirl show, and we have the Black Adam movie coming up, but like I don't know. It's just I have a really really good feeling about it, and it's just that the potential is there for you know it's the movies are moving away from Zack Snyder's stuff, and and so I feel like there's a lot there, a lot of reason to be optimistic about stories spinning out of Black Adam. I'm really kind of excited for Black Adam for every reason other than Teth Adam himself. And I hate to say that because no shade to Dwayne Johnson,
Nah, a little bit of shade to Dwayne Johnson.
no shade, but a little bit of shade. But
Yeah.
yeah, so basically, like I'm there for the movie just because of the potential, or mainly because of the potential that it poses for this team. Because Hawkman and Doctor Fate have both had great solo,
Hmm.
outlets and stuff like that, and they also have really great roles in terms of the JSA. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, so here, so this is a tough one. This is a tough nut to crack, right? Because when it comes to prominent, um, you know, Swana, characters,
Mhm.
like Black Adam is probably like up there,
But only because there's not a whole lot of other ones by comparison.
fair enough. And, it's unfortunate that The Rock himself is not of that background, right?
Right. Yeah,
But if his star power is able to kind of bring that character further into the mainstream and do so in a way that gets people to care about and want to see that character in more things, then that is kind of like a net positive for Black Adam specifically, right? So that's
absolutely.
so that's a reason that I do want um, the Rock's portrayal to be a good one.
Hmm.
Um, that's a big driver for me in wanting the movie to be successful, because even though, ironically, even though The Rock isn't Swana, Mena, like there's that community is still going to feel uh the brunt if the movie isn't successful, of people saying, well, clearly that kind of character um isn't marketable, you
Yeah,
know
I mean, frankly, like his story, to whatever degree is gonna take place, even though the place is fictional, which DC tends to do,
hmm
it is still like a Swana, location, and folks are, so yeah, I mean that is sort of a precarious situation to be in, but yeah, I again I'm sort of rooting for it. Even the land of Kandak kind of has more of my more of my rooting than Black Adam himself. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
shout out to Sarah Shahi, who I've been a huge fan of for many years. I don't want to be spoiled on it, but like her character has history with getting superpowers as well.
yeah,
Maybe she can get a glow up in the same way that we saw Lila Alpha Luli get a glow up in Moon Knight. You know what I mean? Like that would be awesome.
yeah.
Like.
I really hope that they this consideration is a thing, because there funnily enough, I will say not funny haha, but interestingly enough, um we have let me see. Over on Legends of Tomorrow, we
Mm-hmm.
have Zari Tarazi and her brother Behrad
And Barra.
Tarazi. And in the comics, we have Adriana Tomaz and her brother in the comics, but they changed him to being her son, Amon Tomaz in the movie.
Okay.
Um, Neither of them like they I don't know. The consideration there is like neither of them really have neither they definitely don't have a presence now. But even back when they kind of were present, um Adriana Tomaz and like Zari Tarazi, which was the alternate version of
Mhm.
anyway, they both were Isis and the brother was Osiris, and it was like maybe they could come up with a better name for them. Perhaps that might be a good thing. I just feel like I would like to see, I have a couple of tangled up thoughts here, which, yes, I would like them to be more present. And yes, I would like them to have like less problematic names. But also, I kind of want to see a future where Zari and Berad are not the same as Adriana and Amon, and they're all kind of superheroes. Like they're all there in the comics and in live action, and just
Yeah. Well, this is where unfortunately the the Arrowverse doesn't have
mhm.
that much sway.
Yeah,
So I I'm I would love, excuse me, for Barad to work his way into the comics in whatever form, you know. But I don't think that they would. I think that they would be more likely to incorporate elements of of Zari into
yeah,
Adriana in the comics to flesh her character out more than to create a whole new character.
yeah.
Given
I
that
mean,
given that the roots of the character are the same.
frankly, as a DC fan, I feel like a lot of my conversation tends to be in the sort of abstract of like, wouldn't it be great if this
Yeah.
was the status quo instead? Like,
Mhm.
so, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, but ultimately, it's that we both want the win, right?
Hmm.
I guess I'm just sort of looking at it in the realm of like how could it come about,
Yeah.
and if part of what happens is in Black Adam, people really love the portrayal of the character, then that
Mhm.
bodes well for DC trying to rework the character for the modern era
I
and give
mean,
her.
the movie has a greater reach. So
Yeah,
I think obvious, I think it's fairly obvious that that is the greater likelihood of what's going to happen. I just, I'm just kind of thinking out loud in terms of my
sure.
sort of ideal timeline.
Yeah. And again, we can pivot a little bit to like the Hawkman of it all. Um I'm very curious about what the ramifications might be if um if this version of Hawkman, if this version of Carter Hall catches on and people love him to the
Oh yeah,
extent that.
Hawkman is not going to be black. Let's just clarify that one right now. Like okay, like at best, I think we're going to get like a kind of swarthier Hawkman. But do I think we're
mm,
going to be like, yeah, he's a Negro
mm,
now, and that's a
look
thing? Nah, I don't think so.
look, Randy, I mean, I know what you're saying, because let's face it, like Jason Momoa was very successful as Aquaman. And
Uh-huh.
they found a way to just start drawing Arthur Curry
Well,
in a
but
way
but
that's.
but the way that they drew him was not, it didn't go full,
No,
it
I
didn't
agree.
fully go.
I
Yeah,
agree.
so it was like, okay, rather than, how about instead of giving you Polynesian Aquaman, let's give you the white guy, but now he just has the tattoo. Like that Yeah. So
Yes,
so so
that's what we like to call a half measure. I agree.
we were at the pitching table and we were like Polynesian Aquaman, and they were like white Aquaman appropriating
Polynesian.
Polynesian culture. That is what I heard. You know? So
Right,
they were
right,
good
right.
with that.
Um, however, however,
Hmm.
one thing that Hawkman has going for him is the reincarnation aspect.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I mean,
it's a
yes,
little bit easier
but
to like
but
to kill White Hawkman and
no,
have
but
him.
then you have to bear in mind that in his latest run, they kind of like broke the curse of the reincarnation, and basically the ending of that story is that he's like on his last life, but his last life takes him into the distant future of like where he's mentoring for the Legion of Superheroes. So like
I
no,
understand. Listen, I
he's white
understand.
forever. He's
Listen,
white into the future.
I understand that that's what the book tried to do. But if again, if our boy, why am I forgetting the actor's name right now?
Aldous
Um,
Hodge.
Thank you. If Aldous Hodge just blows lights the world on fire, and and there's a demand for Black Hawk Man, you know, there's a way, there's a way to make that happen. You know,
I I I would be happy to see it like gets mystically zapped
mm-hmm.
and like
Especially because there's already a Black Hawk woman, or Hawk
mhm.
girl. I never can keep up with like who's calling who what. You know what I mean? Like, the power of reincarnation. Hey, this is black now. Yeah,
I
you know.
mean, okay, look. So as much as I would be on board for it to happen, um they I like honestly, I'm surprised that we kind of got this far in terms of them being willing to touch the Hawkman character because they seem like they really sort of have a disdain for including him and stuff. And so, like, I mean, if it happens, then thank you, Dwayne Johnson. I don't know what else
Right,
to say. Like,
right. And no, not just Dwayne Johnson. Thank you, Dwayne Johnson, and thank you, Aldous Hodge. You
well, yeah,
know,
of course. But like,
um,
yeah, because that's basically the kind of way that it seems like that's sort of the only avenue to sort of get the character to be, prominent again. And I mean, it is what it is at this point. Like I will take, whatever route it takes for us to get to more prominence of these kind of underappreciated characters and greater diversity, then yes, by all means go for it, because like
yeah.
I don't have time to be trying to gatekeep. Oh, this
Right.
isn't
But this is where I want to clear out a little bit, because I know that there are a lot of people who are just averse to race
Mhm.
bending, right?
Yeah,
Because they're in their mind, race bending a character does not necessarily lead to this character being race bent in the comics,
right.
right? And I get that. I get that part. That they still have the freedom, like we talked about with Aquaman, right? That
Mhm.
even though they were able to reimagine Arthur Curry as Polynesian in the movies, they were not willing to reimagine him as Polynesian in the books. So to that person that's anti-race bending, they would
Mhm.
say that it's pointless, that it was wasteful to have race bent him in the movies. And my response to that is, but if you would have just made him a white guy, you wouldn't even have created the demand
Mhm.
for the race bending in the
Right.
comics.
And the thing is, it really is down to the particular showrunner or filmmaker or what have you, because um we don't have we still have a white Catwoman in the main continuity of the comics, but there's been a number of times where she is not a white woman. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
not, it was not a one and done. It just was
Yeah.
like
And
You
even
know,
and even with the quote unquote white Catwoman, like they've
mhm.
talked about her potentially being like Latina, like
Yeah.
lighter skinned Latina. And it's not that hard, honestly, to just be like, yeah, she's Cuban. You
Well,
you might have you might
I
have
think
thought she was white, but she's
yeah,
actually Cuban,
I
you know?
think they integrated either Italian or Cuban or something like that in the comics, that she is not just straight up just a white woman. Um and I feel like, we got Brown Huntress out of nowhere. Like there was no precedent
Hmm.
for that in live action. And all of a sudden they were like, yeah, you know what? Actually, some Italians can be on the swarthier
Dark, yeah,
side.
dark,
We're gonna go for
dark
that.
skin is fine. Yeah, like
So I mean the
obviously
case
in the
there.
in the in the racial draft
Mhm.
we're able to just like undo all the years when they were depicted in another way, like for
Right.
for our purposes. But in the real world, we have to kind of play around a little bit and tweak them so that these elements can be incorporated, and sometimes they don't stick. Like, again, we can talk about Black Canary. Like we got a multiracial black multiracial Black Canary. There's a realm, there's a universe in which we get a Black Canary solo series or Black Canary solo movie, and that leads to, in the comics, little by little, them darkening up.
Yeah. 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 Cause the thing is, I know that it was not, I'm fairly certain it wasn't on purpose. That, we got this multiracial Jason Todd looking portrayal in the comics. Like he kind of looked like he was, might have been Latino, light skinned black or something, like he had some kind of
Hmm.
fade or something. And that was just how they decided to design him. Like you didn't have to, there was no call for it, but
Hmm.
just because it's not going to be 100% consistent across the board, that's no excuse, and it feels like a cop out to me
Yeah.
to try to say that you shouldn't race bend at all when we got so many different white characters. We never ever ever have an issue where white characters are accidentally, oops, we colored them black. Like, the issue is
Mhm.
always the other way around, where the black characters, like, they've been like the colorist was displaying
Yeah.
some colorism, and
Exactly.
and
Like
that was,
like shout out to when Black Adam was became a part of the Justice League.
yeah,
All of a sudden, he was illustrated in such a way where you couldn't quite tell that he
like
was that he
Superman
was
had a better tan than him.
right.
So yeah, that to me is suspicious. That had
Yeah.
to,
So if they can tweak it that way, if they can tweak it the other way, lightening up these characters, then they most assuredly could tweak it, going to the melanated route.
yeah, like Marvel, they were like, when they found out that Makari was real popular in that movie, they was like, nah, that white boy is gone. We're done with
Yeah.
that.
It's very interesting that all the Inhumans now I mean, not the humans, that all the Eternals
Yeah,
currently look,
yep.
maybe not every single one, because I think that
But Phastos is
Kingo,
black.
still looks Asian as opposed to South Asian. But every other Eternal
Yeah,
has been
and I
melanated.
believe, and on top of that, I believe Sprite has kind of been like made sort of, maybe like androgynous or
Okay.
non-binary. I'm not sure, but like, yeah,
Yeah,
they realize, like, when the changes are popular, they have that option, and I'm happy when they go for it. But they at least the option is there. At least
exactly.
the option is presented, and like the possibility, like fans are able to kind of have that choice.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's all made up. It's all imaginary.
Yeah,
And again, it goes back to what we're talking about with the racial draft, that like if you know sometimes it's going to go against established canon, but as long as you don't, you know, diminish the character, most fans will be on board with it with a
And,
tweak.
and frankly, I feel like, I don't know how many other readers or watchers of this media would agree, but personally, unless the new thing specifically references the old thing, like I'm perfectly fine pretending that the show is like, the comic or the movie or whatever is in its own continuity. Like if they specifically say that, as a result of whatever comic event happened, like if they say that, then yeah, fine. Okay, I'm expecting consistency from that mythos. But if not, then it's perfectly fine to kind of have your own little creative spin on it, and that's not gonna hurt anybody.
Well, here's the thing, especially with DC, because they're constantly doing
Yeah,
reboots. They're constantly like saying
exactly.
like there's another Earth that where this happens, and then we combine the Earths and the blah blah
Hmm.
blah and the old we mash it together and old Silver Age, Golden Age, da 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 da, whatever age we're in now, blah blah, and like it's so easy for them to just kind of be like, this is what it is now, you know,
And
like
that's what allows them to have so many simultaneous Batman books. So let's be clear.
yeah. So, you know, all you have to do as a reader is be on board with it,
Hmm.
and again, all they have to do as creative people is not insult your intelligence, is not uh come up with some change that is just completely undermining to what the character is. And for
Hmm.
most characters, it's not it's not that hard. We've done in previous seasons. We've had Red Hood with Native American
Hmm.
roots or of Latino roots. Like you can plug that in, and him and Jason Todd still be the same dude,
Right.
and I just don't think that there's so much. I don't think there's a lot that is informed by whiteness in his story. You
Yeah,
know,
I mean, a good deal of comic characters generally that, are white don't have their like racial and ethnic background explored. Like it's real nice and cute when you have friends who can try to tell you like, oh yeah, my I got some German, I got some Russian, I got some Irish in the back. Like, I mean, that's a white thing. Y'all can tell us where your background is from. You can trace it. That's great. But that's
but
kind of the full
but does that
extent.
ever play a role into what how you
Right. That's
yeah.
that's kind of the full extent that you sort of have the racial and ethnic conversation in terms of talking about whiteness. Like white people don't really like talking about race because it's not their sort of flattering point. Um so as a result of that, there's a lot of sort of ambiguity. And they're sort of like you look at the character and you're like, no, they wanted to kind of make the character's experience sort of generalizable. So yeah, we're gonna generalize it.
Yeah,
That's sort of what happened.
yeah, that's, I mean, that's the irony, right? I mean, it's like you wanted this character to be universal,
Hmm.
unless you're going to argue that the only people whose stories can be universal are white people. And listen,
Right,
there are a lot of people who make that argument, but
right.
unless that's your argument, then you have to stand in the reality that it shouldn't matter, that that this story can still be universal even if
Hmm.
it's not a white person.
Right, exactly.
you know um and every now and then, white people who are listeners who have stuck around and listened to this podcast this long, every now and then it's okay to put yourself in the shoes of a person of color a fictional character and say, wow, I still can relate to this character, even though that character doesn't have my background. Because guess what? People of color have been doing that for our entire lives.
Yeah. And I will even add on to that, like, you don't, I mean, first of all, you don't necessarily relate to a lot of the characters that share your same ethnic background
Mhm.
anyway. Because, like, yes, you're both white, but you're not a billionaire. You're broke. You are the one that has to try to, like, decide whether or not you can afford the Batman comic. He can afford whatever he wants to buy. So you can't relate that much. Like, you don't know how a newspaper works, so you don't know whether or not the story that Peter Parker goes through is actually accurate. Like, you don't even know if that's like a thing that actually happens in a news office. So you can't relate to him that well. But and aside from that, why do you even want to relate necessarily to a character on that level? Every time we kind of get into this conversation, why is the color of the character a thing that you need to relate to them about? Especially when you don't like talking about racial considerations anyway. It's not like you're like, oh yeah, he speaks really, really closely to my ancestors' history with the great Irish, the great potato ethnic cleansing that happened there, with the UK and all of that. Like, no, you didn't really have that sort of connection there. Like, maybe there might have been a connection in terms of Daredevil being Irish Catholic, but I mean,
Yeah,
he's
but
one of the
I would
few.
listen. I would argue that the Catholicism of Daredevil is is a bigger deal than the
Yes,
Irish part of
yes,
it. So
exactly.
like there are different ethnicities that are Catholic that does not have to be Irish.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly it. And because, we have it's very easy to sort of um but all of these arguments that I have heard have been sort of sidestepping or sort of deflecting and posing imaginary problems, like, this issue of redheads being represented and stuff in media is like, that's a white created issue. We
Yeah.
were not the ones that made y'all, like, not that. First of all, again, for the 50, the umpteenth time, they're not that primitive. They're not that prevalent in the population anyway. They are 1 or 2% of our population. But aside from that, it's white people's fault that y'all even were tricked into thinking that there were more redheads than there are. That's their fault. We're not to blame for that. So
Yeah.
so for a more realistic portrayal to be enacted, you're directing your animus in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, I think really sadly what it comes down to is that comic books are a visual medium.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, people just retreat into what they're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So they see a panel where this character looks this way, and they want that character to continue to look that way forever.
Yeah.
And even though there are different artists and different creative teams that can like somewhat tweak the character and how they're depicted, to where they could kind of be seen as a different ethnicity,
Mm-hmm.
like because the majority of the depictions of this character are of this one ethnicity, people don't want the change. They don't want how many times have you talked about people who like watched like the Iron Man cartoon and they're like, I know it kind of looks Latino in that cartoon,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
but because he's depicted in so many incarnations as a white guy, and of course he's played by a white guy in movies, you know white people are like, this is what he has to be, you know
Yeah.
this is
I
how
feel
he.
like I sometimes when we have these conversations, I feel tempted to kind of be like, we should sort of troll the people that are complaining about the race bending and be like, yeah, Peter Parker should be dressed exactly like he was dressed back in the 60s. How dare you try to upgrade him and change him from what I know of the comics? Like,
Where's his
that,
bow tie and his glasses?
right. Why isn't he still dressed like a stereotypical dork from the 50s? Like, how dare you?
Yeah, it's like that kind of modernization is acceptable, but like making him a little bit darker skinned and not being, Caucasian is beyond the pale.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that, shout out to our Jewish, brethren, like, even though, you know, the stories have explained him to be like a Gentile, there's a whole lot of uh, Jewish signifiers in his background.
Hmm.
And if they wanted to say that Peter Parker were Jewish, like there are a lot of people who would be like, yeah, I could see that. I mean, they've done it. They did it. They did it
Yeah.
in the Into Spider Verse,
Hmm. Yeah.
and there was not a ton of protest around that.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where we should leave it. Like I said, we didn't have a lot of news stories, so like we don't have to really like get into them. Shout out to Avatar with the re-release making $31 million worldwide. So I guess people still like Avatar, maybe. Um, Richard Harmon, who you might know from the 100, he's going to be joining the upcoming season of The Flash as
Hmm.
Captain Boomerang. James Earl Jones he is probably retiring from the role of Darth Vader. He has signed over rights to the digital deepfake company that Disney operates to do Darth Vader voice.
Hmm.
And that's about it. Fantastic Four, real quick. Jeff Kaplan and Ian Springer will be writing that film. We still don't know the casting, which was what everyone cares about.
Hmm.
And also, there's a rumor that Punisher's coming back to, coming to the proper Marvel Studios MCU. There was a rumor that originally that it was going to be Jessica Jones, but because of Kristen Ritter's responsibilities to the Orphan Black sequel, she won't have the time for that. And those were our stories. Um, Randy, do you have any concluding words for the listeners?
Um, I I got nothing. I'm not gonna try to force it. No, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you for riding with us, listeners. We went a little longer than we thought we would. We had a lot of topics to cover. Again, because we're about to embark on the fifth season journey. Hopefully, you guys want to embark on it with us. Like I said before, follow us on the socials. Racial Draft, racial.draft on Instagram, Racial Draft on Facebook. Uh, Comment, rate, give suggestions to your various delegations as the characters that you'd like to see drafted. We'll be back next week as we get ready to kick off the season. I hope that this was really informative. I hope that this was really useful in terms of thinking about what we do and why we do it. And guys, until next time, all things are possible.